It's Luke here for SimBoxx. Today I'm delighted to be joined by one of the most respected voices in boxing, boxing aficionado, boxing author, Mr. Andy Clarke. Andy, how are we doing?
Good, yeah, very well, thanks. Just negotiated what was supposed to be the most depressing day of the year, I think, wasn't it? Earlier this week, the 20th of January. So it's yeah, it's one of those weeks this week, I think, isn't it, where everything seems a little bit flat. So it's good to jump on and have a chat because there is plenty of stuff coming up.
Absolutely. No, January is usually a notorious quiet period for boxing. There's not usually a lot going on, but given that there's so many promoters, so many shows, etc., the dates are being filled now. And in January, although we've only had that one UK show with Boxer, there's been so much news with Tyson Fury's retirement, Conor Benn, Eubank being announced, the press conference for Feb 22nd. So there's plenty to talk about and plenty to dissect.
Yeah, everything's really hit the ground running, hasn't it? And we had the Ring Awards on the 11th as well, which was quite a big part of all of that because lots of news came out from there, and we got an idea of future plans on all sorts of fronts. So it is quite unusual, like you say, for things to just click into action quite so quickly. But it's good because it shows that it's going to be another big year. It's going to be another competitive year. We had that one show in Sheffield, but there's more coming. There's more coming quick. And once we get into February, then that we really are off and rolling. But it's one of those industries, boxing, that particularly we love a rumor, don't we? Everybody does, but we love a rumor. But these days, rumors start and then they get substantiated really pretty quickly when it's around the big stuff, which is good. It's good because what we've wanted for ages is to see things delivered, and things are being delivered now. And I do think that the boxing's kind of more in the general sporting conversation now than it has been for a little while. It used to be just around Fury or AJ fights generally, but I found myself at a few things over Christmas and New Year where people I know who are general sports fans who will watch a big fight, they're just more aware of what's happening in the sport than they normally are.
Yeah.
And I always find that's quite a good barometer for just sort of where we are kind of profile wise, because we know, don't we, that the likes of us, that week in week out it's a niche sport, boxing. But quite a lot of weeks of the year now it's not.
Yeah, absolutely. No, just to expand on that a touch there, I think I listened to something on Talksport with Simon Jordan and Spencer Oliver, and I think Simon was questioning in terms of the exposure boxing's getting at the minute, like you say, with your casual audience that usually only tune in for the big fights, just how far can boxing go? He said it's never going to touch the football, with the Premier League and whatnot. That's always going to be the number one sport. But do you think there's a ceiling for boxing with it being a niche sport, or do you think like the possibilities are endless when we're getting, these big fights, big events, and most importantly, consistently as well?
But boxing's kind of always been the same in a way, in that it is capable of pulling in a massive audience for big fights in a way that other sports aren't really. Let's just take football out of the equation because it's the biggest sport in the world by an absolute mile. It always will be. However many professional leagues around the world pull in viewers and people paying on the gate and all of that, it almost doesn't count because it's just this unbelievable beast, and it always has been. And in America, I don't know that much about American sports, but the NFL and the NBA particularly will always dominate. There's so many games in the NBA for a start anyway, and in NFL, that is a huge budget, absolute leviathan of a thing that again you're never really going to be able to touch. With boxing, it's just how often do these big fights come up that people really engage with, and the more often they do, then the more tempted they might be to watch it a bit more regularly than they have done previously, because you might see someone pop up on a big card, but their next fight isn't on a card of the same magnitude. And you look at, I mean, I work for Sky, so you look at what Sky try and do is they've got a number of fighters they're trying to push, they're trying to promote, they're trying to turn into stars, and they're capable of doing it because the platform has a lot of reach. And they wouldn't want, I would imagine, these boxers boxing on cards that aren't exclusively Sky cards all of the time, but they understand that the exposure you get from being on a big card is exactly that. So it's never really going to scale the heights of football, but unless you go back to maybe in this country, it maybe never has. You'd have to go back probably about 100 years maybe for boxing to be in the same kind of place as professional football. And in America, in the 1950s, when television started to appear in people's living rooms and boxing was broadcast almost every night of the week because it was easy to film compared to other sports, then it was huge. But things change, you can't hark back to bygone eras because there's no point in that. But it's always it's always had this power, this punching power, boxing, forgive the pun, compared to other sports to really break out of its own, burst out of its own bubble. It's always had that. We just need to see it happen as much as possible.
Absolutely. And speaking of fights that are going to help boxing burst out of its bubble, reach a bigger audience, there's none going to be quite bigger in the UK, certainly, than Conor Benn, Chris Eubank finally settling their rivalry. We're looking at the back end of April, nothing set in stone, but it's, as you say, in boxing, we love a rumour, and the strong rumours are it's going to land at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in London. Where do you sit with this fight, Andy? Is it a good fight? Is it everything that's wrong with boxing? Are you excited for it? Are you going to watch it? Where do you sit with Eubank Jr. against Conor Benn?
Well, there's a lot to it, isn't there? And that will be part of the intrigue for it for a lot of people. We know the circumstances around it. Broader sports fans may or may not. It depends. Again, this is a good example. It depends how closely they follow the sport as to whether they're aware of what has happened, and then whether they care or not is another thing. A lot of people might look at this and say, well, okay, he's tested positive, Conor Benn, but that was 2.5 years ago. By the time they fight, it won't be far off 3 years ago. He hasn't boxed in the UK since. These are the facts that they'll kind of glean. He's now been given his license back. That's a hefty absence, and they might not see that there's anything particularly wrong with that. And you can make a very strong argument that there isn't really anything wrong with that. The way the whole thing's played out has been odd. There still isn't much available to us in the way of explanation when it comes to the grounds for him being cleared and things like that. There's a lot of confidentiality around it legally,
Picking up on
which
that there, Andy, so not to cut you off, sorry, but do you think they owe it to boxing and to the boxing public, if you like, that they owe us an explanation for what had gone on? It's played out so publicly when it's gone right for Eddie and Conor, and then when it's not gone so right, it's always like a confidentiality conflict. Um, do they owe the boxing world and the world in general an explanation for what's going on, or do you think that this is acceptable, that it's kind of hidden behind a confidentiality wall?
no, I think it'd be really good if we could get some details. As for whether they owe it to us, that's kind of a difficult thing to quantify, really, because I mean, who owes who anything ultimately when it comes down to it? If you can do a certain thing one way and that's the easiest way for you to do it, then why wouldn't you do that? But it would be definitely be a good thing if we could just get some details, complicated though they might be, difficult to interpret for the layperson though they might be. It would still be good to get them, but whether we do or not, I suspect we maybe won't. But people will move on from that, and they'll move on from it quite quickly. And I'm not saying that that's an ideal scenario, but that's the way the world works. And by the time this fight comes around, I won't say that people will have forgotten about all of that, because those of us on the inside of it will be aware, obviously, of what has happened. But it's a fight that people want to see. It always has been. It got really big towards that fight week the first time around, a bit bigger than I thought it would, to be honest with you. And now it will be further down the line. I think it will be bigger. And you've got two people who are very, very good at selling things. Eubank and Ben completely understand the game. They get it. They can totally and utterly get it. I don't know to what extent Eubank Senior may or may not be involved. That's not really clear. But as time progresses and the closer we get to it, I think like a kind of moth drawn to a flame, he may well find that he can't resist it. Nigel, I'm sure, will be involved as much as Conor wants him to be, because that definitely seems to be the arrangement there. But once we get to it, I think it will be. it's going to be big. It's going to be big because any sports fan 45 or over will remember Ben Eubank the first time around. I was like 12, 13 the first time around. And it was one of the things that really just cemented an obsession with the sport. I was already down the rabbit hole, but that pushed me so far down, I was never coming back. And that will be the same for loads of people. And if you were a sports fan at that point, even if you weren't particularly a boxing fan, you will remember it because it was everywhere. It's difficult to explain to people how massive it was. On the terrestrial broadcaster, it got a huge audience. It was played out, in the national media. It was massive.
Mhm.
So everybody who was alive almost at that point and took an interest in sport will remember it. And a lot of them may well revisit it just for that reason. So the pull of it is big because it stretches from fans who are young to fans who are old, to be honest, and that's what you always want.
Yeah, absolutely. You're just touching on the historical element of this fight with the rivalry, arguably the greatest rivalry in British boxing history between Chris Eubank Sr. and Nigel Benn. In terms of this fight and the legacy that they're trying to continue, who do you think needs it more? We know Chris Eubank Sr. stopped Ben in the first fight. There was a contentious draw in the second fight. So the Ben family have never actually got one over on the Eubank. So does it mean more to Ben because of that? Does it mean more to Chris because it's at his weight class and it's a smaller man coming up, so therefore he's maybe a slight favourite? Is it who do you think it means more to?
Yeah, it's a good question that because if you look at it historically, then you would say the Ben dynasty needs it more because they haven't had a win. But then when you look at the more kind of contemporary circumstances, you would say that the pressure is on Eubank more because yeah, it's his weight class. But then again, on the Ben side of it, if he loses this fight, it would depend on the manner of the defeat. But if Conor Benn loses this fight, to an extent, where does he go then? People would argue, well, he's stepping up in weight. It's a free hit, but there's no such thing. I don't think there's no such thing. And he hasn't in the recent past beat anyone at welterweight of any particular note, although it did look like he was going to get a world title shot, possibly with the WBC, which I found slightly mystifying. So I don't know what kind of state it would leave his career in, but given what's happened to him in the last few years, he badly needs something big to reignite it. So I think whichever way I look at it, it's probably more important for him than it is for Eubank. But defeat for Eubank is completely unthinkable because it would be pretty humiliating for him, I think, to lose to a naturally smaller fighter. So there's a lot that goes into it. There's an awful lot that goes into it. And as for what we'll get on the night, I'm not too sure. I thought Eubank looked okay in his kind of comeback fight, if you like, in Saudi. He'd been out of the ring for a while after beating Liam Smith in the rematch, which was a massive win because he'd been knocked out by him in the previous fight. And to come back and beat the person who's done that to you straight away or in your next fight is a big, big achievement. I thought he looked okay in Saudi, but he is advancing in age. 160 is obviously difficult for him to make. People are talking about the rehydration clause. I don't really have a problem with it because Conor Benn's coming up to his weight and he was never going to be able to get everything completely his own way. But then Conor hasn't really done an awful lot. His performances haven't shown as much, the two he's had since in America, since the positive test. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest with you. Although I'd say you would probably have to make Eubank favourite because it's his weight, basically.
Yeah, of course. Now, you touched slightly on there, whether rightly or wrongly, Conor Benn was seemingly in line for a WBC welterweight world title shot against Mario Barrios if it wasn't Chris Eubank Jr. Chris Eubank Jr. himself campaigning at middleweight, he looked like it could have been a possible middleweight world title fight with Erislandy Lara. Now, this fight, we're led to believe, has got a rematch clause. Is there, obviously, it's going to be a huge payday and it's such a grudge match. It's almost like a one-off event. Can these guys afford to take two fights against each other, especially Conor maybe, or maybe sorry, maybe Chris being slightly older? That can he detour back into world title contention after this? Is it was he 35, touching on 36? It's a massive payday and it's a big grudge match, but it's a bit of a curveball in terms of their world title ambitions.
It is, but I don't think Eubank's all that bothered about that. I think if you look at the way his career has gone, I think he's kind of proven without actually saying it. His actions have spoken louder than any words. And what they've told us is that it's not really a concern for him. I think if it had fit into the schedule and a sufficiently big name had appeared for him to fight for a world title, he would have done it.
Mhm.
But that hasn't happened, and I don't think he's really too worried about it. And yes, there was chat about that fight with Barrios for Ben and Lara for Eubank, but they were smokescreens really, or just stalking horses, I think, to get this one done because this is the one that makes them the most money, and a rematch is ideal. If the first fight's good, then we all want to see a rematch, and the fact that it doesn't have too much relevance on the world stage doesn't really matter to an extent, or doesn't really matter at all, to be honest, because you could kind of compare this to, in some ways, to Hey Bellew, in that that was another domestic grudge match that on the world scene at heavyweight didn't have any particular relevance, with total respect to those two, and they would agree with that. But in the UK, it was massive. It was absolutely massive, and it did big numbers. And this is kind of the same, and that is the most important thing for fighters when it comes down to it. It's unusual to be able to get a fight of this size that isn't a world title fight, say, or having not already won a world title, but sometimes circumstances work in your favour, and this is one of those times. So if it's a good fight, if the first one's a good fight, then there would be an appetite for a rematch, absolutely, no question.
Yeah, of course. We sit 2 or 3 months away from that fight, and there'll be plenty more to discuss and dissect, I'm sure, in the coming months. Just switching lanes a little bit, Andy. Last week we also had the news of another retirement from Tyson Fury. I think at this point maybe this one's a bit more solidified. I don't know what you think. There's obviously that golden carrot dangled of an Joshua fight, finally settling that score. What do you take from that initial brief announcement from Tyson Fury of this retirement? And do you take this one with a pinch of salt, or do you tend to believe this might be it for Tyson Fury?
I think it definitely could be it. I think I believe that this is where he is at the minute. That he's made that decision, and that as of now, that is what he intends to do. And I was the same when he retired after Dillian White. I thought, he's made this decision. I don't think it's with any kind of longer term view of, okay, well, to tempt me back out of retirement, it'll be a big comeback and more money and stuff like that. I think Floyd Mayweather did do that. I think he was quite targeted and specific about retirements and comebacks. I think he was thinking longer term. I don't think Fury is here. I don't think he was post Dillian White. I don't think he is here. But that's not to say that he couldn't change his mind. He's perfectly at liberty to change his mind. I know that if he does, everybody will just say, "Oh, well, yeah, we told you so. It was a plan all along." If he ends up changing his mind, I don't think that would necessarily be the case. I think as of now, this is what he wants, that he's had enough. He may find after a while that he needs boxing, because when he came back for Derek Chisora, what he basically said was that he realised that after a bit of a rest, he needed boxing. He needed that routine, that regime of going to the gym, because it kept him on an even keel. That exercise was really important for his mental health, and that will continue to be the case. And exercise for him his entire life has involved going to the boxing gym. If he keeps going to the gym, or if he goes back to the gym after a bit of a break because he needs that to keep his life, where he needs it, where mentally where he needs to be, then it's going to be really difficult for him not to come back, because what fighters will often tell you when they retire is you need to stay away from the gym for 2 years. Those first 2 years are the hardest.
Mm.
Stay away from the gym, do exactly what you want, get out of shape, even so that coming back becomes even more difficult. But he's not going to do that, because he needs the exercise element of it. So that'll make it hard. That'll really make it hard. And if he manages to stay retired, even though that's going to be his kind of day-to-day existence, then you'll know that he really is out, that he's not to be tempted back. So yeah, I take it on face value at the moment, but that's, he can change his mind, and if he does change his mind, then fair enough. People will kind of, I don't know, not kind of throw it back in his face necessarily if he changes his mind, but there'll be a lot of "I told you so's" and all that kind of thing. But it's one career, this, and if you decide there's a bit more left, then then you're going to give it another crack, aren't you? And of course, that fight with Joshua will always be there, and it's huge money, and the interest in it would be absolutely enormous. But I don't think he would be coming back for the money, although he has said a lot in recent times about how he's only boxing for the money. I think he would be coming back because boxing is something, the gym is something, and the focus of having a fight to train for is something that he needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, just to touch on something you mentioned there about the general idea, or unwritten rule, if you like, of staying away from a gym for 2 years is what you need to break the mold. But I suppose it's a dangerously fine line for somebody like Tyson Fury that suffered the pitfalls that he did when he went off the rails after the Vladimir Klitschko victory, that if he allows himself to stay away from the gym, get slightly out of shape. That the worry is that he goes too far that way and kind of slips into old habits. So it's a dangerously fine line and a dangerously fine path that he's trying to navigate.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly the point because I don't think he can stay
Yeah,
away from he can't stay away from physical exercise because he needs that for his mental health. He's spoken about that numerous times, and we can all relate. I think there's nothing better. I find myself if you wake up and you're in a bit of a funk and you're frustrated about this and you're annoyed about that and everything's just kind of on a bit of a short fuse. We all have days like that, and I always know that the best thing I can do in that situation is just go for a run, get a good sweat on, do something like that, and it just clears your head and sorts you out. That won't be the same for everybody. Different people have different approaches, but if that does work for you, then you really do need it. So maybe he'll need to look around for a different training environment to provide that for him and get heavily into cycling or who knows what, swimming, whatever it might be. But the really obvious thing for him to do and what he's always known is to do some form of boxing training. But that'll just make it much more likely that he'll come back. So as you say, that's the difficulty. That's the difficulty for him. But again, if he did get into cycling, then he would probably get into it to a level where he became obsessed with that because that's what they're like. There's not really anything they can do about it. They can't really do things by half measures. These any professional, to be honest, any professional athlete, they're all ridiculously high level when it comes to their obsession with things. So it will be interesting to see how that all plays back. But from my point of view, if he did decide to come back, then I'd welcome him back. I would, because you're a long time retired and you're at liberty to make whatever decision you want.
absolutely. Now, obviously, with that news of Tyson Fury's retirement, that kind of left Anthony Joshua in nowhere to turn. He didn't take the Daniel Dubois rematch. Obviously, Dubois taking on Joe Parker on Feb 22nd. Eddie Hearn, speaking for Anthony Joshua, firmly nailed his colour to the mast in terms of we're chasing down Tyson Fury. That's the fight that we want. Now that seemingly isn't going to happen. Where does that leave Anthony Joshua? And you see every man in these dog has come out and called for this fight with Anthony Joshua. That even at this point, he's still the cash king at heavyweight. It's still a big payday when you fight Anthony Joshua and names like Dillian White, Deontay Wilder, Zhang Cabello winner, Mike Bacoli in Africa. Where do you sit, Andy, on in terms of what's next for Anthony Joshua and which way would you navigate in what's the correct way for Anthony Joshua to pursue 2025?
He is in a bit of a difficult spot because I don't think he would have seen that coming with Fury. I really don't. It's always possible with Tyson, of course, but I don't think he would have imagined that would have happened when he dropped that news on the Monday. And it does mean that his next move isn't entirely obvious. People have talked about Wilder. If Wilder comes back and gets a win, then I suppose that is doable. But at the same time, I don't think that would really ignite in the way that they would want it to. I just don't quite see it because with Wilder, the attraction was always his ability to knock people out, the danger that he brought, the sheer menace that he brought, and that's just been completely missing from him as a person in fight week. He's different now, and from his performances as well. And personally, I don't feel like that's something you can really get back. I think once it's gone, it's probably gone. So I don't see that as being a particularly attractive prospect. Um, the winner of the winner of Dubois against Parker, I'm sure he would definitely be interested in, because obviously that would be a world title fight. But then again, there are other people in line for that. And although he is a massive sell still, you can't just keep giving opportunities to somebody for that reason when obviously he was comprehensively beaten in his previous fights. So it's difficult because it needs to be big, because there's no point putting him in with somebody who's tricky potentially, because people will fancy it against him now, given what happened against Dubois. People have been talking about that fight against Bacoli in Africa, and that would be an unbelievable occasion. But I think what Eddie will be telling Joshua is, let's just sit tight still for a bit longer, because that fight against Dubois was only in September. It feels like it was a long time ago, but it wasn't. Fury. I think that's what he'll be saying to him. We need to hold the line, because Fury will be back. I think that's what they'll almost be banking on, because I don't see an obvious fight for him outside of that. Dillian White is an option, because that would be a spicy build up, and it would still sell in the UK. I'm pretty sure about that. And I think it would be a decent fight for him, because I think Dillian's best days are quite a long way behind him now. Um, but yeah, I think when the news came about Fury's retirement, they would have been left thinking to themselves, I really hope that he doesn't stick to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, with see if we take Benn and Wilder out of the conversation just for a second, because as you mentioned with Dillian White and Wilder, with all due respect, the best days are firmly behind them. In terms of Dubois, Parker, Zhang, Caballel, and Martin Bacoli, they're five of the best current heavyweights in great runs of form. Without putting you on the spot, and obviously I wouldn't ask you for a prediction, but of those five, would you make Anthony Joshua favourite against any of them should those fights be made? Whether it be Parker, Dubois, Caballel, Zhang, or Bacoli. Does Anthony Joshua start as favourite for you in any of those five fights?
No, I don't think he does. I don't think he does. That might sound a bit harsh, because he was on a decent run before he got in with Dubois, but the manner of the defeat against Dubois will just give anybody who gets in with him now so much encouragement. They will feel like they know what they need to do to beat him. So I think they would all fancy it. I wouldn't say I would make all of them heavy favourites, but you look at what Dubois has done, and obviously beaten the first time around, so he's got to be a big favourite. Parker's put together three really substantial, or two particularly substantial wins. So even though they boxed in the past and Anthony beat him, it was a long time ago. I think on current form again, you would have to make Parker favourite. You look at Zhang and Caballel, who are going to box each other. Zhang against Joshua, I think would be an interesting fight. I think that really would be an interesting fight. So that's maybe one you could look at. If Zhang were to beat Caballel and look really good, then I think again you would make him favourite against Joshua, but not possibly by all that much. Caballel has had those two big wins. I wouldn't necessarily make him a favourite against Joshua if they were to fight next, but if he were to beat Zhang, then you would have to. It's kind of top trumps, isn't it? Basically, that you're looking at. And then Piccoli has got that big win against Jared Anderson. He's got FA Jagba next, hasn't he? But Piccoli, I just look at Piccoli and just think he's such a massive problem for everybody. I'd make him favourite against quite a few people. I think it's a good pack, isn't it? Because we've had these guys for a long time now: Fury, Joshua, Wilder, Usyk, and one of them's retired. Two of them are coming towards the end. One of them, an Usyk, can go on for as long as he wants to, it would appear currently, because there's not really any signs of him declining. I mean, Itauma's another guy you could put in that top pack. A lot of people would already. I probably would as well, actually. I probably would. and there's not that many people who I would pick to beat him currently.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's an exciting name. Andy, I know you're a very busy man, so I'll thank you for your time. I appreciate you jumping on the channel. It's been an interview that I've been really looking forward to, so I really do appreciate your time.
No problem, mate. No problem at all.
Well, guys, thank you for joining myself and Andy today on SimBoxx. Make sure you hit the like button, leave a comment, let us know your thoughts on the current heavyweight division, your thoughts on the Conor Benn, Chris Eubank Jr. situation, and I'll catch you on the next interview here on SimBoxx. Thank you.